That's the most thoughtful present I've ever heard of. Okay, so you've got some experience then of manuscript forgery.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful feeling. Forging a manuscript is the coolest feeling, like you're entering into a holy space somehow,
Wow.
participating in the ancient rites. I think he was highly curious, and he surrounded himself with people who were like him,
Mm.
really interested in knowing things about the world and getting out into the world and seeing other practices. And for instance, in music, he's the one who noticed that even after he had ordered that the liturgy had to be the same everywhere, that it wasn't being done.
Ah.
He would go to one church and then another church and another diocese, and he would notice they're not singing the same liturgy. I ordered that they do the same liturgy, and they're not doing it. So he was paying attention. He was
Yeah.
definitely awake.
Oh, they thought they were gonna get one past him, but
Oh,
he
they
was.
tried to fool him. There's this whole story told by the Lombard, Paul the Deacon, who was describing the reaction to Charlemagne's rule that everyone should sing the same chant
Hmm.
everywhere. And, he wanted to suppress the Gallican liturgy. He wanted to suppress the Milan liturgy. He wanted to suppress the Visigothic liturgy and the Beneventan liturgy, and everything he wanted to be modeled on Roman liturgy. And so he thought this would be easily enough done if he got some cantors from Rome that he would borrow from the Pope, and they would come up to the north and disperse to various religious centers and teach Roman chant, of course, in oral tradition
Hmm.
to Frankish cantors. But these Roman cantors, being jealous of Frankish glory, according to the text, made a plot amongst themselves that they would teach falsely and sow confusion, so that the Franks would never learn the correct chants. And so they were dispersed to various churches, and each one did something different. But Charlemagne, in his travels, heard it, and he personally uncovered the fraud. And he had all these guys sent back to Rome where they were punished. And then he wanted some more cantors, and the Pope said to him, if I send you more of these guys, they're going to do the same thing. They're incorrigible. He said, I have a better idea. Why don't you send down here two of your best singers, ostensibly on some mission, and don't mention that they're singers even, just, some diplomatic mission, and they can live here for a year or two, and they can secretly learn all the Roman chants
Hmm.
and bring them home to you. And that's how they solved the problem. It would make a fantastic film. I'm
Well, I
surprised
mean,
nobody's filmed this.
or a CD. I mean, imagine if somebody made a CD inspired by that idea and called it Chant Wars.
Hmm, there's a thought. It's not for nothing that these stories always grab us. You performed in my ensemble this song about the two giant women who are taken as slaves and have to grind at the mill of a king.
Yes,
And they have to grind out anything he wants because it's
they
a
do.
magic mill. And
They
only
do.
those,
They're not going to put up with that for very long.
yeah, and they just don't like it that he's not respecting them because they say, can we have a little rest? And he'll say, you'll rest as long as it takes a cuckoo to sing cuckoo. And this fires them up, and then they get their vengeance on him.
Very relatable.
Treating your employees poorly, it's something we all know. It's disrespecting the people that do the work. And in this case, they were creating huge wealth for him, and he
Mm,
wasn't recognizing their contribution. Maybe if he recognized their contributions, he would not be dead. But he just wasn't able to put that together in his brain. So that's an extremely ancient idea. The idea, and especially is involved men in positions of power with women in positions of servitude.
yeah.
Very, very strong. And I think that kind of a story always existed
Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely, yeah.
it
All
took
kinds of
its
examples from ancient
oh,
Mesopotamia,
yeah.
poor man of Nippur, just people who are nasty and bad getting their just desserts.
Some things never change.
Yeah, and we love to hear those stories as well
Yeah,
because, like,
and
we
we'd
all
love to
want to
see them get justice, you know?
yeah, we all want to believe that that's actually what happens.
Yeah. I don't know, lately I've been thinking there is no justice, but it will
Yeah,
come one day.
let's hope so. But then for the story, for the Beowulf story, in order to create some variation, you would just substitute some details, or do you think you'd be like looking at other stories and poems from, in Old High German that you could kind of
I wish there were enough that we could look at them. There's very little has survived.
really there's nothing.
Not epic poetry.
But I mean just other texts in general.
Yeah, you could use other texts as help with structuring the language, for instance. There's in Old Saxon, which is like Old High German, it's just a dialect. There's a whole retelling of the New Testament, which is called Heliand, and basically was used because you had a lot of illiterate men joining monastic orders in the 10th century in Germany, or they were retired warriors. You know, they were beat up and finished at age 22 from fighting, and they checked themselves into monasteries to just get away from their life because they probably were too poor to be married and they had no prospects for anything. So they joined a monastery, but they were illiterate because they'd been fighting men all their lives since the age of 12 or 13, and they didn't understand the Latin liturgy. So the Gregorian chant was to them just some like weird new music, and they didn't understand the Psalms. They didn't know the Psalms.
Ba ba ba
So
ba 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 ba
yes,
barbarian to them.
right. So some very kind-hearted monks in that time thought we should make texts in their language so that they can have access to the Bible and to worship, and then they'll fill in the blanks later and learn Latin. And that's what the Heliand is. It's a retelling of the whole thing in Saxon dialect, and it also uses words that come from the warrior culture to explain, like the disciples are not the disciples, they are the band of fighters.
Oh, that's great. That's so it's a translation, not just a kind of direct linguistic translation,
Oh,
but it's a kind of
it's a retelling.
ideological.
It's a retelling, and it's kind of like the Bible for young men. It gets to the point, and it tells it as a story of men banded together following their war leader.
Hmm.
And Jesus is not this meek and mild softy. He's a warrior.
Which is there in the Bible, but it's
Yeah,
sort of you can either, you can bring out different
sure.
interpretations depending on who your audience is. A
Yeah, I
bit
mean
like,
he's kind of badass in the Bible, really.
yeah, it's like different beer recipes in different countries.
Exactly. Yeah. So that might be a source to turn to for the language part of it, but you'd have to
Mm.
talk to a real philologist who knows Old High
Ah,
German. I'm sure at Cambridge there must be like fantastic people. Admittedly, I have usually an instrument that's accompanying what I do, giving me lots of context because the instrument is usually a harp, usually has 6 strings, and those 6 strings must be tuned in some way. And that's where we get into the technical jargon about how to tune a harp.
I'm just going to stop you there because you always use the term harp
Yeah,
to describe this a six-string instrument in which the strings stretch over the bridge.
we call it a
And
lyre.
yeah, so there's the organological kind of distinction between harp and lyre,
Yeah, yeah.
which would, would have that instrument described as a lyre. But I think you're interested in how the sources describe it. Is
Yeah,
that
well,
fair?
the sources always describe like a 6 string instrument that we would call a lyre is never called a lyre.
Mm.
In the sources, it's always called a harp.
When you carrying your lyre and calling it a harp, it always reminds me of the 50s and 60s jazz musicians always called their instruments horns, whatever they
Horns, yeah,
were. Yeah.
right. I got into that habit because of for me, you talk about the Anglo-Saxon harp or the Anglo-Saxon lyre, and for me, the Anglo-Saxon lyre is a person. and it smells like Greek antiquity. It has another background. It has another feeling, and it's a
Mm.
Germanic instrument.
Mhm.
It really has its birth in the north of the Alps, and it might have been known to Rome, probably as a primitive instrument. They thought of it as one of these unpronounceable tribes played this instrument.
Played it and got drunk.
Yeah, or couldn't tune it, but played it anyway. But that instrument, call it harp or lyre, it has a certain quality, which is that all the strings are the same length,
Mm.
as opposed to the triangular harp, where the upper strings are much shorter than the lower strings. And there are many more than 6 strings, 13 strings, or even 20. But the
Is
harp
it?
with the 6 strings, they're all the same length, and you can't make wild tunings with what we know about string technology,
Mhm.
string making technology of the, let's say, 7th century.
So it puts a limit on the notes at your disposal,
Yeah,
so
you
that's one of the parameters.
can't have extravagant tunings. Probably they're going to be tunings that more or less parallel the human voice. In other words, a typical male voice, what's the lowest note you can sing? You can probably tune that note on the instrument.
And we have sources that tell us
And we
how
have
they were tuned.
particularly one source that gives us an actual tuning model for such an instrument. It's admittedly a monastic source, so it might be like a music teacher. You know how music teachers are always very positivistic and coming up with new, clever ways to teach music to the kids. Um, it could be that it was just that, but it's a surprisingly versatile tuning proposed by a monk named Hucbald in the 9th century. So that's one actual tuning that we have for such an instrument.
C, D, F, G, A,
Yeah,
isn't it? It's just
it's like a no-brainer,
primal.
very primal. Who knew? So
And that gives us a binary, chord structure,
yeah,
alternating between your main note and your note below,
two
which is
possible fifths and a bunch of fourths. Yeah, which turns out to be very useful when you look at what we know about the polyphonic music of that period.
mhm.
It has a lot of parallels. But there are other tunings that involve the lowest string being an octave away from the highest string, as opposed to a sixth. And then it's just a question of, if you have, let's just, for argument's sake, say the lowest note is G below middle C, and then you can tune the highest of the 6 notes one octave above that. Before, it's not going to break, it still is sounding okay. And you can pretty much do that with string technology from any period. You've got a high G and a low G, and you've tuned 2 out of 6 strings. So you've tuned a third of the instrument just with this one simple point of departure. And of course, anybody that's played any medieval music or knows anything about such instruments would say, we have to tune 4 more strings. How are they going to be tuned? Is it going to be the same pitch over and over again, or random, not tuned? And I would say probably it's not random. There's probably a system. And then you ask, okay, if there's a system, is it a logical system or an illogical system? Is it 4 half steps? That's not logical, because it doesn't leave you with anything approaching modes as we know them. And what would give us a logical progression? Something with more perfect intervals, because you've already tuned an octave, which is next to the unison. It's the most perfect interval you can have. So what's next? You can tune a next most perfect interval is the perfect fifth. If you tune a fifth up from the lowest note, and you tune a fifth down from the highest note, you have 4 out of 6 notes tuned. You're just missing strings 2 and 5. And that's where you start to get into identity crises. Because
Nice way of describing it.
because with 1, 3, 4, 6 tuned in fifths and fourths and an octave, it's very bland and open and structured as a kind of weight carrying structure.
Mhm.
Whatever you decide to add with strings 2 and 5, that's going to give it its color and context. And that can be moved around. That can be one place or another, but probably it's going to yield another perfect fifth. Question is, where is that perfect fifth going to be situated? And that's kind of the two big tunings I use for almost everything that's not Hochwald. I call it an epic tuning.
That's the Beowulf
Beowulf
one.
tuning is I call epic open tuning. Open tuning means that it's basically D mode tuning. The reason it's open is that you don't have to make any decisions. Every note you play is a good note. There are no wrong notes in open epic tuning. So you never make a mistake. It's just not an issue.
Everything just sounds good with everything
Everything
else.
sounds good. It doesn't matter where you put your hand, it's fine. It's all good. Which is useful if you're going to perform a 5-hour epic where things are moving fast sometimes and slow sometimes, and you need a lot of space for telling the story. The other tuning is what I call epic closed tuning, which has the finalis on string number 2 and 5.
And just define finalis quickly.
That's the final note of the mode. It's the main note of the mode. It's the definition of the mode. It's the fundament of the mode. The Latin scribes would have called it finalis, which just means the final note.
King of the mode.
Yeah, it's the determining note to which everything is tending. And if you have that on strings 2 and 5 with the fifth, it means you have a very important context note, which is the note below, which they call subfinalis, below the finale. And if you have the subfinalis and the finalis, you have an enormous amount of structure. But it requires attention. You can't just play any old thing. You've got to really figure it out in advance where you're going with this thing. And you develop hand movements which are typical for that mode, and you don't think about them anymore. You have a repertoire of moves, and they're always there. It's not usually very many. So these are the tunings that, for my own work with the harp, inform the way I might treat a recitation tone. So it's the collision of recitation tone on the one hand with tuned instrument, and they create a kind of synergy
Right.
that
So
allows me a lot of movement, but also is incredibly structuring. I don't have the option to do just anything I feel like doing. Can I tell you my fake story?
oh yeah, please. I love a fake story.
It's basically what you're talking about exactly, is that we did a project with Sam Barrett
Songs of consolation.
of Boethian songs, because he wrote this amazing book about the reconstruction of Boethian metra, and it was very inspiring, and we had a whole project with him over a period of a couple of years to reconstruct enough Boethian metra to fill a whole concert program. This was in 2015, 16, 17, around there. And we got to the end of the project, and there was a recording, there were concerts, and we wanted to give him a nice kind of going away gift. And Sam is also quite the jazz expert as well as medieval song. He's really very knowledgeable about jazz. And we'd been talking to him about Coltrane and other composers. And we decided to make, there's this Cambridge fragment of the Cambridge Songbook, which contains the Boethian metra, or 6 or 7 of them. And we decided to make a fake copy of that page where we would stick into it another song. And it was a song that was written in neumes, just like the other pieces, and that followed the record Kind of Blue.
Wow.
And Hannah wrote a text in Latin, not perfect, but we got through it somehow with the Latin. And we took the melody, and I no longer remember how the melody goes, but I was the scribe when I made a copy of this one page, the right size and everything. I got a piece of parchment, and we presented him with this lost song, which was an 11th century notation of a 20th century jazz standard.
Nice.
It's a joke that only Sam Barrett could get, tailor-made for him.
That's the most thoughtful present I've ever heard of.
I don't I don't know what he actually really thought of it. He might have thought these people are really crazy. Yeah.
I imagine he was completely speechless.
I don't know. You'd have to ask him.
That's amazing. Okay, so you've got some experience then of manuscript forgery.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful feeling. Forging a manuscript is the coolest feeling, like you're entering into a holy space somehow,
Wow.
participating in the ancient rites. Even if you're kind of corrupting it a little bit, you're doing it with a good heart and with a real purpose.